In a market where it's extremely hard to value anything because we don't have any future cash flow projections, we don't have any comparables because tokenomics are so different, where it's so hard to value anything, psychology becomes extremely important. Crypto is not necessarily driven by the project that has most adoption. Crypto is much more driven by the psychology of the market, by attention, by capital shifts. And because of the nature of the crypto market, we see things like this. This is Ethereum's dominance. It's a long-term chart, and it was no surprise that we bounced in the middle of April of this year at a very similar level to where we had bounced before in August of 2019. It is no coincidence that the turnaround happened exactly at that dominance level. This arrow, by the way, that marks the move from proof of work to proof of stake. Now, after a psychological support has been found, we tend to get the narratives. We tend to get stories around strategic Ethereum reserve companies that are now aggressively buying into Ethereum. And I don't say this has no impact. I'm simply saying that it's not the main driver of the price, right? If we look at the Ethereum purchases plus the reserve company purchases, we get close to 10% of Ethereum supply. Yet Ethereum from the bottom appreciated by more than 70%. Actually, on the topic of those ETFs, have a look at the asset under management of those Ethereum ETFs. It peaked at the beginning of October of this year, and since then is coming down. Now, parts of that decline is obviously the Ethereum price itself going down, but it's not all. Because have a look at the total value locked measured in Ethereum. That also peaked in the second week of October, and since then declines. This is an effect across the board. This is not just the BlackRock balance going down. If we remove that, we still see a quite constant decline in the holdings of Ethereum by the exchange traded funds. And so many investors don't see Ethereum as just another altcoin. Ethereum does have the traditional on-ramps. People can buy Ethereum through the ETFs. That's not possible for most alts. And so it might be most appropriate to compare Ethereum with Bitcoin. And while the ETF flows for Ethereum are questionable, they are much more constant for Bitcoin. For Bitcoin, we've got the ETF since the beginning of 2024, so obviously this chart is longer in duration. But still, even recently, we have seen the AUM, the Bitcoin ETFs measured in BTC going up. And so I believe that explains why this Ethereum dominance rally did not last all the way to the top, but took a break and experienced a decline since the end of August. Let's actually zoom into this a bit more. We had a relatively constant underperformance in the last 3 to 4 months, but then things suddenly tended to break out. It looked better for Ethereum. Why was that? It was because Tom Lee bought some Ethereum again. BitMine increased its allocation towards Ethereum, and not many people expected this to happen, myself included. If we remove BitMine from this chart, we can see how the treasury company story has already lost its steam since the beginning of September. And so if BitMine can't continue to aggressively buy more and more Ethereum, Ethereum's dominance is likely going to suffer from here because Bitcoin sees the inflows. Ethereum does not. I think it's better to stay rather cautious with Ethereum, to not necessarily do the contrarian bet here, to rather go with the trend which is negative. Maybe Tom Lee will buy Ethereum again. Maybe Ethereum rallies a bit for a short period of time, and then maybe we can enter a short position on Ethereum, but the overarching trend should be clear. Ethereum is likely going to suffer because there is no broad adoption by treasury companies. That has already run its course, and the ETFs aren't buying either. And the market in general tends to be rather bearish now, right? At one point we were at $125,000 in Bitcoin. Ethereum is seen as a more risk-on asset compared to Bitcoin. So probably during a bear market, it will not outperform. Now the problem with this underperformance of Ethereum is that this will also hit the altcoins. This year might have just been the beginning. If you're enjoying this video so far and you're getting some value out of it, then feel free to give this a like. It will help the channel grow. It will help spread the word. Thank you very much. Because have a look at the correlation between the Ethereum market cap and the others market cap. Ethereum and the alts tend to move in the same direction. The prices are much more coupled compared to Bitcoin and the altcoin market. There's a reason for that coupling. That reason is liquidity pools. On Ethereum and on all of those layer 2s, right? Base, Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum, we tend to have most liquidity pools versus wrapped Ethereum. So the altcoins are not measured in US dollars. They're actually priced in wrapped Ethereum. The pricing happens as the ratio of wrapped Ethereum versus the particular altcoin. So if Ethereum goes down by 10 or 20%, then the altcoin automatically also goes down by 10 or 20% without a single transaction happening, simply because the altcoin is defined through the liquidity pool by the ratio between the alt and wrapped Ethereum. Wrapped Ethereum is the same as Ethereum in terms of price at least. And so if this is our future, then the altcoins will come with it. But there are some fine differences, right? Sometimes altcoins are more expensive versus ETH. Sometimes they are slightly less expensive. So there is a range here. And that range is expressed in this chart. The ETH market cap relative to the others market cap. Since 2017, so for the last 8 years, this has traded in a somewhat predictable range. Sometimes Ethereum is cheap, sometimes the altcoins are cheap. Right now, Ethereum tends to be rather cheap. It's not at those heights we have seen in summer of 2023, but still, there is the risk in the worst case that Ethereum could underperform the alts by 50% from here. And that's counterintuitive, right? Most people think that things simply are levered on top of each other. As in when Bitcoin goes down 5%, Ethereum might go down 7%, and the altcoins might go down by 10%. But that's not what's happening. Usually we see capital rotation between Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the altcoins, and sometimes different assets are cheap or expensive versus other assets. And right now, Ethereum is expensive relative to the altcoins. Now, I am not bullish on the alts. Again, I do think that Ethereum will struggle from here, but very likely the altcoins will struggle a bit less, at least in terms of market cap, not necessarily in terms of price, because we do have token dilution. But if you're not affected by the token dilution, or if you're even benefiting from the token dilution, let's say you are staking your altcoin and there's only staked new supply hitting the market, you might actually benefit from alts doing better compared to Ethereum. Yes, I have renamed this channel from Gerhard Bitcoin Strategy to Bearhard Bitcoin Strategy because I have been bearish for the last weeks and people started making fun of it, and I'm simply embracing that. But it's okay, right? It shows how I am macro positioned, and I will of course change the name of this channel once I get more allocation towards risk on assets again. The problem and the point of this video is simply that Ethereum seems to be the worst of all the bets. Its dominance is on the decline. Nobody wants to buy the ETF. Everybody buys Bitcoin instead. Everybody except Tom Lee stopped buying, and Ethereum is even expensive relative to all those trashy altcoins. I might be completely wrong here, right? I don't have a crystal ball either. I'm simply just showing the data and I'm saying how I interpret this. If you're buying Ethereum right now and you're making money, congrats to you. You made money, I lost money. That's the market after all. But if there was some data included in this video that you didn't consider before, then feel free, of course, to give this video a like, and feel free to also subscribe. I publish videos regularly. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Cheers.